I would like to introduce Don and Celia. Their presentation is called Evolution of Flight.
Hi, everybody. I'm Celia Price. I'm presenting with my father, Don Price. He will be running through a variety of cards in his collection, and we're excited to share everything with you. Dad will do a little welcome introduction. We'll jump into the first section, which is dirigibles. We'll move on to early flying machines, then go into some military aviation cards. Then we'll conclude with some fun passenger flight cards. We'll do Q&A at the end. So save your questions till then. We hope we stay on time. I'll turn it over to my dad to introduce himself and his collection.
First of all, let me thank Celia for putting this together. She's an experienced computer presentation person. I wanted to give a short story of how I started collecting postcards in the first place. I was a child collector. Some of you no doubt were also. By the age of 7, I was heavily gathering my postcards already. So let me start by starting into my dirigibles and zeppelins. The dirigibles are these gas balloons with gondolas attached to them, and they were developed particularly by the French Army. This is one of these blimps in 1907, performing at a barnstorming event at the Iowa State Fair in 1907. I heard of a lot about pilots flying their airplanes around in these state fairs, but I'd never seen evidence that there were balloons being demonstrated in these same affairs. And what it says on it, I didn't see this, but it was an actual feat at the Iowa State Fair. Barnstormers were usually aviators that performed stunts with airplanes, carried up passengers, such. This is the balloon called a dirigible. It's a gas balloon with a gondola being developed by the French Army. This is La Patria. That's a picture from 1907. It was the first airship built for the French Army. But interestingly enough, in 1907, this balloon was ripped from its mooring in northern France, pleasantly sailed over France, the Channel, through over England, Wales, then was last seen placidly heading out into the Atlantic from Scotland. I think but there were fortunately no men on the board. This is La République. That was another one that crashed near the site in France. 4 men were aboard. That was in 1909. I don't believe any of these military airships were used in the First World War. This is a picture of a Zeppelin. Now, the Zeppelins had a rigid frame inside the gondola. There was a guy named Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin who designed the first rigid frame dirigible in 1900. They became known as Zeppelins, of course. During World War I, the Germans produced 115 of these Zeppelins. In September 1915, they sent a fleet of 16 Zeppelins headed for London. A British plane managed to get above one at 11,000 feet, headed on fire. The explosion was seen all over the place. This explosion in 1915 was about the end of the Zeppelin raids on London because planes could fly over them and blow them up. Well, it's an example of a photo card from World War I period. You can see that it's fading. Unfortunately, a lot of old photo postcards are starting to fade after 100 years. This arrival in Berlin, German was difficult to read on it, but there did mention Lazaret Hospital. It was in late 1914, so it may be that the writer, who was a soldier because he had felt post, might have been recovering from an injury from the first part of the World War I. These are 2 picture German postcards honoring or memorializing the Zeppelins, first of all, over Paris. They usually didn't do much damage because they were so high and they sort of just dumped the bombs out. But one in 1916 over Paris killed 24 people. There were many Zeppelin raids on England and London in World War I, but eventually incendiary and explosive bullets could ignite the hydrogen, and that put an end to the raids. This one on the right shows a Zeppelin over Antwerp. At the beginning of the war, they sent Zeppelins over Antwerp and also Liège and Brussels. They just dumped bombs willy-nilly onto the towns. One raid in 1914 killed 10 people over Brussels. In 1914, a British pilot managed to get to Dusseldorf, was able to destroy one of these Zeppelins in its hangar. This is a German military cruiser Adele in battle with enemy aircraft. That's a German postcard in support of the German air fleet. And you can see the pretended firearms coming from the airplane into the Zeppelin to commemorate their destruction by the British pilot. And this is the Graf Zeppelin that was this was in 1929. It was enormous, as you can see. That's a gondola there in the harbor. They're getting ready to either start or finish. There's no information on these. Most of them are mint, these cards. There's not too much information on them. When there is writing, it's usually pretty, in French or German, it's pretty illegible. There we have the Graf Zeppelin again in its hangar getting ready to start. I should say that the base for the Zeppelins, like here, were in the town of Friedrichshafen on the southern side of the Lake of Constance, because that was the highest place in Germany. They could ascend more easily from that higher altitude. So that was the big center of Zeppelin production. This is a commemoration of one of these Zeppelins, which flew commercially from about 1929 till 1937. They started in Germany. They went down to Senegal, Africa, then over to South America, and up in particularly to Lakehurst, New Jersey, and then back home. They had this commercial flights going. They had commercial flights on this route from 1929 to 1937. It was the explosion of the Hindenburg in 1937 that stopped that business. This is the Graf Zeppelin moored in its hangar. You can see how enormous that is. That's in Friedrichshafen in 1929. Here again. Now, this is the first picture of the Hindenburg. We have erased the swastikas on the tail of this plane. We didn't like to see those swastikas, but they were starting in the Hitler period. They started using them for propaganda purposes, but they flew all on this commercial route from Africa to South America to New Jersey and back, flouting the swastikas. And the fellow that developed these rigid ships invented them in 1900, named Eckener, got into dispute with Hitler because he was using these Zeppelins for propaganda purposes. So that was at the time the largest airship in the world. Now we go to the Halloween cards. This is just an amusing Halloween card. All it says is from Aunt Mary, mailed in 1909. This is a card commemorating the voyages of a Zeppelin from Friedrichshafen to Bad Kissingen, which you see here, shows first, second class passengers. The main right, it was mailed in 1912. It says, I'm spending a month here. I like it better than in Wiesbaden. There wasn't much of interest on these cards, if I could read them, which I sort of could. Well, that completes the Zeppelin portion and dirigible portion. Keep in mind that dirigible was a French word, and it was for balloons with gondolas. And the word Zeppelin were the rigid frame machines, first invented in 1900. Okay, now we're going to go to early flying machines. Here, old airplanes. They had two air meets in South San Francisco at the Tanforan racetrack in 1910 and 1911. This particular one shows an aviator named Louis Polhan, who's a French aviator. This is a Farman biplane. It was the first flight that took place where he flew over the Bay Area. And on the back of that card, my grandfather wrote my father, "How is this airship? It will bring me back Sunday." My father was 5. This is the second Tanford Air Meet, also in 1911 or 1910. This is the second one, same place. And it only says that pioneer aviator Glenn Curtis flew a Curtis Pusher biplane. Curtis became very important in the airline industry subsequently. This is also at that air meet. That shows Henry Hubert Latham flying a French Antoinette 4 monoplane. That's a nice picture there. It was not mailed. Here's a card of the first shipboard landing in 1911. An aviator called Eugene Ely on beginning of 1911 landed his Curtiss Model D Pusher biplane on the armored cruiser Pennsylvania in San Francisco Bay. It had a tail hook. That was the world's first shipboard landing. Now, we've talked about three aviators, Paul Hands, Latham, and Ely. They were a team of pioneer aviators. They would go around from air show to air show around in that period. They were a good team. They demonstrated flight, did all kinds of and stunts and everything else at various fests, state fairs, such. Here's a commemorative picture of Wilbur Wright's voyage. He flew in Europe in 1908, mostly in France. He demonstrated flight. It was the first time they'd ever seen an airplane flying in Europe. This is commemoration of that European tour. This is a Farman Airlines. That's, quote, regular air service from Paris to Germany. The 25-seater Farman F-180 convertible into a sleeper with 12 beds. Well, I don't think that I would want to try to go to sleep on that berth, on that plane, on that trip. I don't think I could fall asleep. But it managed to do so successfully. It held to that route in the early days. This is an unidentified plane, probably flown by a woman named Helene Dutroux, who at Cherbourg. She was a very famous sport person, an aviator, bicycle racer, a Belgian lady. The back of this card has a long message in French. She says, notably, I am visiting my doctor in Cherbourg. My leg is healed. Perhaps she broke a leg in one of her sporting events. But having that signature of this important, rather famous Belgian flyer is interesting. But you can see what a contraption that is. I suppose she flew that herself. We can't tell, but she certainly wrote the French message on the rear of it. This is a Vickers passenger airplane that was first noted in 1919, and the Vickers was a British company. I don't know much else about this particular airplane, but it's kind of interesting looking. I guess it successfully flew passengers. Here's another one from the Avion Latécoeur, which was a French company that was built in 1919 and looks quite impressive. I guess they had successful flights, commercial flights with it. This is at the Aérodrome Bourget in Paris. You can see here a tri-motor Imperial Airways. They flew from Paris to London. It wasn't posted. It just says tri-motor Imperial Airways, so it doesn't identify particularly the specific plane, but it's interesting. It had successful commercial flights. On the left is the Boeing 80 tri-motor biplane, designed in 1928 for the Boeing Air Transport Company. It carried 12 passengers and mail, and its first commercial flight was in 1928. It had the first airline stewardesses. And I'd like to digress to an American Experience program you can now see on PBS about American stewardesses' effort to organize and be treated fairly and equally to men. It's a very interesting program, so do look that up, about the stewardesses on American Experience. On the right, you see a Boeing Model 247. That was introduced in 1933. It carried 10 passengers mail. This is the Philippine Clipper. It says on the back, in flight over San Francisco Bay. These ships take off from Alameda every Wednesday for Manila, 8,200 miles away, and land every Tuesday. They flew from the San Francisco Bay at the 1939-40 Exposition. This is the Philippine, it doesn't say, but that apparently is the Philippine Clipper also. It's called the flying boat Capella of Imperial Airways, used on the Empire route, whichever that was. It had accommodation for 15 passengers and 2 tons of mail. The top speed was 200 miles per hour, and it was posted in 1939, probably from Manila. This is an interesting picture. It's probably a clipper ship at the American Army Air Base in Cavite Bay, which was where Manila was located. You remember that the Philippines were still a colony, and Douglas MacArthur was the boss of the islands and, of course, of the Army. He made a very big blunder there in the war. He knew about Pearl Harbor when it happened, and he failed to disperse the American airships located in neat rows at the Cavite Air Base, which was across from Manila. And of course, the Japanese arrived the day, I think, destroyed the Army Air Force. That was his first big, so maybe a second big blunder in the Second World War. I presume it's a Clipper. The car's in there from the 1930s. This is the largest airplane in the world. The club has seen some pictures of this already. It's called Dornier DOX, built in 1929. It was enormous. It had luxury cabins and had dining rooms. It was just fantastic. It provided luxurious accommodations for 66 passengers. On an early test flight, it carried 169 passengers through. Well, I wouldn't want to have been a part of that. This plane landed in New York in 1931 on an attempted commercial flight. It caused quite a sensation in New York. Only 3 were built. They were built in Berlin on the lake. All were scrapped. There were no accidents with this plane, but it wasn't a commercial success. None of them, of course, survived. They all got scrapped. This is the Spruce Goose, which many of you are familiar with. The Howard Hughes H-4 Hercules, built in 1947 in Long Beach. It flew in November 1947 for about a mile in the Long Beach harbor. It was the largest flying boat ever built. It was built of wood. It was just enormous. In 1929, it was moved to a museum in McMinnville, Oregon, where you can still visit it. In 1992, it was moved up there to McMinnville. They have quite a museum up there in that little town. This is just a picture of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. That flew a lot around the country, and it flew through the Bay Area. I'm not quite sure where it came from, or it was heading for the Houston Space Center, but it was quite a sight to see when it flew by. And it supposedly is on a 747, perched on a 747, and it flew all around. And maybe some of you got to see it in 2012 when it flew by. Now it's on display at the California Science Center in Los Angeles. That is the Endeavour, but not the plane, which was a 747, I guess. Okay, that completes that.
All right, so we'll move on to the next section, which is military aviation.
Again, I should point out that these are almost all mint. If they did have writing on them, it was usually very hard to read the cursive writing, especially if it's in French or German. We start out with this World War I flight over the German lines. There are very few postcards of the airplanes in the First World War, but that shows a British pilot and observer, and they're carrying a mascot, if you can see it there. It says, ready for flight over German lines. Yes, these are some British soldiers celebrating the capture of a fallen German plane. They were all having a good time around there. I don't have many postcards showing airplanes in the First World War, but they did fly. That lady I showed you, that Sportzler, she couldn't fly in the French army because she was a woman, I suppose. During the war in 1942 in San Francisco, I went to the local Five and Dime, and they had a great array of these kind of postcards. No specifications and just sort of drawings. They cost a nickel each. I spent many nickels as I could get my hands on and purchased as many of these as I could. I found this on the internet, one of these cards, for $5. So that was quite an investment if I used more nickels and bought more of these things. This is another one of those planes. They're not specified what they are, but this is presumably a U.S. medium-sized bomber in the Second World War. They keep them flying as a reference to a Lou Costello movie from 1941. And this one is also not labeled, but it appears to might be a Boeing Stearman, which was used as a training airplane in World War II. That's another one of these cards without any particular specifications of what it is. Here we have a Douglas XB-19, a U.S. Heavy Army bomber built from 1937 to 1941. It was the biggest aircraft built in the United States for World War II. It was called a flying behemoth, you can believe. This is a French card. It's a flight of British Sterling bombers, the first heavy bombers used early in World War II. Quote, carried a heavy load of bombs and flew so low the pilots could read the clocks on the railway depot. The Sterling is a very famous plane from the Second World War. This is a fighter plane, Hurricane. It sort of replaced the Spitfire in the Battle of Britain from 1940 to 1941. The English developed that, and it was apparently more successful than the Spitfire, which is quite famous because the Hurricane was able to shoot down more German planes. I have to express, though, back one, that the Germans took tremendous losses in the Battle of Britain, particularly because when their planes crashed, the pilots very often survived, but they went into prison. Whereas the English pilots that crashed, they survived and lived to flight on. Goering's Luftwaffe was unable to replace these experienced pilots, and also their aircraft industry was not very good, whereas the British kept improving their airplanes during the war. This Battle of Britain, 1940-41, was really the end of Goering's Air Force because he couldn't replace the pilots or the planes. That gave America a lot more freedom of the skies, for instance, for D-Day. Now we get to some comic cards that I picked up during the war. This one says, well, you can read that. This was an airline pilot. He won't go up without a hostess, they called him. This is another one. Open up, I forgot my overshoes. There were a lot of these produced during the war, these comic cards. As you can read, this production line's getting too fast for me. These were all mint, and I picked all of these up at the local 5 and dime during the war. I wish I'd had more nickels, but I didn't buy a great bunch. This is a consolidated PB-2Y2 flying boat patrol bomber, which we developed during World War II. The U.S. Navy used this. They called it the Coronado. It was, of course, useful in the Pacific War because it could land on the water, which was very important. This is a Hudson bomber, British airplane, a reconnaissance bomber in World War II. This is a Douglas A-20 Havoc. This was an attack bomber for night fighter, and it had a crew of 3. Now we get to more modern stuff. This is a Warthog. The Warthog was developed rather late, and not till 1977. It could carry a huge amount of ordnance and could fly 150 miles. It says on the back, ugly, but you sure can cook. First flight in 1977. This is the Black Hawk helicopter. That was not developed until after the Vietnam War. Was used in air assault, air cavalry. Some first flight was in 1974. These can be picked up at Hillman at various military air museums, these modern cards, which are very worthwhile collecting, especially for younger people. This is an Osprey that was introduced in 2007, and of course it went vertical takeoffs and land on ships. This one has shown one landing on the amphibious assault ship, the USS Saipan. Okay, that completes the military program.
Okay, we're just gonna finish off with some passenger flights. So think of some questions that you might have, and we'll take those after we conclude this section.
We're going to start out with the Douglas Airliner DC-3 for the Pennsylvania Central Airlines. It was the dominant passenger plane in the 1930s and carried 21 passengers. Then comes the United Mainliner DC-3, flying over the Golden Gate International Exposition in 1939-40. Down in that lagoon between the island and the Treasure Island is where the clipper ships took off. I used to take the ferry boat from San Francisco over to the fair as a child. That was a remarkable place. I want to mention a film on the PBS's American Experience about stewardesses, the effort of American stewardesses to organize and get the same rights and salary, etc., as the males on these flights. It was quite an interesting program on PBS American Experience. This is the Trans World Airlines Continental airplane, the Continental, the Connie. It was a very famous plane, and this one was developed by Lockheed during the war in 1943. It was called the Queen of the Skies and carried 44 passengers. That's an advertising card from TWA. And I like to look at this one because it shows elegantly dressed passengers getting off a plane that came from Los Angeles to San Francisco from the flagship Boston, but I'm not exactly sure what particular airplane, that is. But look how they're dressed up. It's very curious. There, we got more of these elderly dressed passengers getting off the United plane. They said on the back, it links the East and the Midwest with the West. This was posted 1954 from Los Angeles to Palo Alto. And it says on the back, on our way to Honolulu. Well, they were certainly dressed up for the flight. They gave all the airlines gave a lot of these menu cards out. This one is one of the United Airlines over showing Crater Lake. And it says here, the menu mentions Dungeness crab, cocktail Louis, scallopini of veal, etc. Many of these menu cards were distributed by the airlines, and they show what wonderful food you used to be able to get on the airplanes. Club Lounge. This was a Boeing Stratocruiser that Northwest Airlines carried 80 passengers ready for service in 1947. So all they are dressed all up fancy, drinking their alcohol and smoking their cigarettes. The men don't even loosen their ties, which I find rather incredible. I was ready for service in 1947. That was the way to travel in those days. This is the snack bar on the same one of those United Mainliner Stratocruisers between California and Hawaii, from which passengers help themselves. How do you like that? Again, the man doesn't even have his tie loose. Looks like a pretty elegant deal. That's where you should read about these stewardesses in this American Experience program, what these stewardesses went through. And there's a purser. Oh, I like this one. This was an advertisement. I like that one. It says that was posted in 1960 from Monterey to San Francisco. It says, this island maiden's languid beauty typifies Hawaii's colorful charm. I decided that time that I wanted to go to Hawaii. That was in 1960. The planes replaced the wonderful cruise ships that used to go from San Francisco to Hawaii. And these planes started coming in, and that killed the Matson liners, which were a very nice way to travel in the 1930s. Here's an elegant meal being served. They're one of these stewardesses you want to read about. If they got to be 32, they were fired. If they got a little too heavy, they were fired. If they got married, they were fired. And they were demanding rights. It's a very interesting program. They served hot meals for passengers between California and Honolulu. They didn't just get pretzels. Note that there are no seat belts. And everybody's dressed to the T's. Look at in there. They don't even loosen their ties. This one shows tables on the same kind of mainliner Stratocruiser. That one is posted 1949 from Chicago to San Francisco. It quotes, on DC-6, two gracious stewardesses help United's 300 passengers feel right at home. Tables can be set up for bridge. How about that? Okay, here's the Boeing 727. Of the Sabina Airlines. I wanted to show that because it's a very funny looking plane. But it was a Boeing 727, I guess, it carried 112 passengers and first flew in 1963. Now that happens to be a Swiss card, but it shows 10 very stylish stewardesses in the back with their fancy hairdos and all that. There were 4 officers. Well, you can believe the 4 officers and pursers got a lot more money than the stewardesses did. They could get married and they didn't have to get weighed every time they got on the plane. This was the plane first flew in 1963, the Boeing 747. I flew with my family from Frankfurt to Los Angeles in 1972, also on several business trips in the early 70s. It was a wonderfully spacious and comfortable plane. We had small children on one of those flights, and it was just marvelous. It's too bad that I don't know why they quit continuing those. It says on the back, the plane with all the room in the world. Look how comfortable they are. But they don't take their ties off, the men, do they? They maintain this formality, and it's just incredible how things have gotten informal on airplanes in the meantime. This is Jet Age. That's showing the new theme building of the International Air Terminal in Los Angeles, which opened in 1961. This is the world's most modern and busiest air terminal. It shows the Convair Jet 800 transport. LAX replaced this international terminal in 1984 for the Los Angeles Summer Olympics. But I think the landmark building remains an iconic example of jet age architectures. Finally, the Boeing 747 Concorde. Oh, no, that's British Overseas Airplane. That's the Boeing 747. Yeah, that's a beautiful airplane. I don't have much information about it. This is the Concorde that flew from 1976 to 2003, and it had high costs and limited demand. And then when the crash in Paris brought it was in 2003, it brought Concorde passenger flights to an end. It's too bad. Otherwise, apart from that explosion or whatever it was, it had an excellent safety record. Okay, that shows some examples of cars. You can probably still pick up some of these in airports. And that concludes the commercial airplane section. Now we better go to questions and answers. Quite a
Thank you
variety.
very much, Don. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Celia. Very nice.
I'd like to make some comments, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's Roseanne. First of all, as a San Diegan, a lot of these things you mentioned came up. Curtis and his biplane actually created the Navy Air Station at North Island in Coronado.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
Yeah, very important. And then my dad had two deferments. One was a farm deferment, and the other one was because he worked at Consolidated. That was a big part of San Diego as well.
And if you remember.
Hey, Don, I was wondering, have you been to the Air Museum in McMinnville?
No, I haven't, but it must be interesting. Just south of
Yeah.
Portland, I guess. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I made it there and saw the Spruce Goose, and it has a lot of military planes.
Oh, also,
It's pretty fantastic.
it's a big museum. I wanted to go back again to that blunder of MacArthur. That was one of the worst blunders he did in the war, not dispersing his airplanes, the Army airplanes from the Cavite Air Base on Manila Bay. He had a whole day to disperse them, and he didn't do it. But another error he made was the Navy in 1940 sent all the dependents of the naval officers in the Philippines back home, one of whom was a boy that I became very well acquainted with. The Navy did it, but the Army never did. So all their dependents and family got captured, and most spent the war in that infamous prison in Manila. I also want to point out again the importance of the Battle of Britain in 1940-41, which effectively destroyed Goering's Air Force. From then on in the war, the Americans and British really had dominance of the air, and old Goering's Air Force just couldn't keep up. I thought that was a very interesting thing.
Lena, it looks like you have a question.
Yes, that's a beautiful collection of cards. Goes way beyond the two articles that you've done on the airships. And I was lucky to look at the detail in the cards. I noticed, you're going to laugh at this, but on that first Graf Zeppelin card, there was all these people standing there, and there was somebody with a white dog just like mine.
Yeah.
Was what?
That very
That's
nice
a white
collection
dog
of
waiting
cards.
Oh, I didn't see the white dog.
I saw that.
I don't know if they were landing or leaving in that particular photograph, but the German card was more or less decipherable. That's where it mentions the hospital, Lazarette. But the cursive writing on these old cards is really very difficult, regardless of the language. A lot of them written in pencil, I suppose.
Dawn, I think you have a question. Dawn?
I just want to say that I'm fascinated that you started collecting these cards at 5 years old.
Well, no, I was 7.
Oh, well, 5, 7.
I was the collector from the get-go, and I'm sure some of you people are also children collectors. Curiously, my twin brother didn't collect anything. That was kind of strange, but we were very, very different.
I retired from Lockheed Martin.
Oh,
Wow.
oh, really? Yes.
Every time you mention Lockheed, I was like, oh, okay. But I'm just absolutely fascinated. So what stores did you go to collect these cards?
Well, during the war, I was just the five and dime had all these nickel cards that were sort of, artificial pictures of various armaments, tanks, ships, airplane, everything, but no specifications go during the war. I didn't want to tell anything to anybody, but it was an interesting selection. Oh, did I mention the store in Berlin with a postcard? Did I mention
don't think
that?
so.
Oh, in Berlin in the Army, I went into a store and asked for postcards. And the guy brought out an album. Then I looked in the album and happened to going through the album, I saw these dirigible or Zeppelin cards in the back of the album. So I quick closed the album so the proprietor couldn't see them. And I said, how much do you want? And I bought them, bango, and I ran out of there. So some of those cards you saw were from that album. I also could go to stamp stores in Germany and ask them, do you have any Zeppelin cards without stamps? So I picked up some at the stamp stores that way, very inexpensive. Without the stamps on them, they were very cheap. So that was good luck in my transportation collection.
Not a question, but a comment. Don, you familiar with the race that brought about by a reward offered by Hearst for the first person that could cross the U.S. in 30 days?
In an airplane?
Yeah, there was a race between Cal Rogers, his Vin Fizz, and Robert Fowler. One was going east to west, one was going west to east.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to win the $50,000 prize.
Uh-huh.
But neither one of them could finish it in the allotted time. So I have some cards of that era.
What year was that?
1911, I think.
Uh-huh, could be. Uh-huh.
I'm not sure. Well, wait a minute. I have here a card.
Oh, you can't quite see it out there.
That's Robert Fowler's plane.
I can't see it, but I guess some people
If you
can.
eliminate the blurring of your
Oh,
background.
maybe if I take it out of the plastic, maybe it'll help.
Protective.
Oh, right there. Stop right there. Not too close.
Okay, if I hold it here.
Yeah, there you see it. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's Fowler's plane.
Oh, that's great to have that.
The Vin Fizz, of course, I don't have a card of that. I have a reproduction. His plane looked very similar. This card is a anniversary memorial card, and it folds out. It's got a picture of the plane. It looks quite similar, but it had the advertising of Vin Fizz soft drink on the bottom of the plane. If you look here in the reproduction, there's a copy of a Vin Fizz label. Cal Rogers' wife made those. Very few survived.
Oh, that's great. I should mention that the internet has enormous quantity of information about these old planes and dirigibles and Zeppelins. They're very popular on the internet.
I wanted to say great presentation, Dawn and Celia. I didn't even loosen my tie for the presentation.
Looks like Patrick might have one last question, maybe.
Patrick.
All right, two quick comments. One, I had a friend of mine, it was actually a girlfriend, and I used to take her grandfather would come out and visit from New Hampshire, Massachusetts area. We were talking one time about Harley Davidson motorcycles and the suicide shift Harley Davidson motorcycles. What does this have to do with anything? He said, well, when we were kids, we would go out to the airfield, go over to New Jersey, watch those airships fly in. And then we saw this one, it caught fire, and it crashed. I went, wait a second. When was this? And it's like, oh, in the late 30s. I said, which one? He goes, oh, it was German one. And I went, are you talking about the Hindenburg? He goes, that was it. I'm like, I go, so you were there at the actual, and I'm thinking, okay, he's got to be, this is, and I go, okay, what was it? Describe it all. And he's talking about a fence that he had to stay behind, all this other stuff. And when it kind of, I said, did it make a noise? He goes, no, it was quiet. And the fire happened, but it was all like kind of red. It went all red, and then it changed colors, and then it just kind of landed. All these people were screaming and getting out, and this German guy ran up to him, but he had these boots on. He was trying to get them to help them, but they couldn't get over the fence. And all this stuff that not on the film reels, not on this day of infamy, or whatever that was that he said. Or the humanity or the inhumanity of it all. None of that. It was all his description. It was very interesting to hear that from him. And then he would try to tell, she had two other sisters, and the family could care less. It was so funny because they're all, No, you like this crap. That's why we send you with Grampy. You like listening to the history stuff. You're all into that. Grampy likes you. That's why you get Grampy duty.
A lot of the people on it managed to escape. That was the nice thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. He
A
said,
lot of them got out of there.
yeah, but they were burned. It wasn't. Nobody was very happy about what happened that day.
Oh no, my goodness, no. That was the end.
Based on what he was telling me. It was an all day thing for him and his friends. They went motorcycling all day on. And it wasn't those plastic motorcycles you guys are all riding around on. We were on metal motorcycles. They had these shifts that you had to. Yeah, this is what we were describing on the motorcycle talk. So anyway, and then one last thing. I have flown in a Zeppelin. There was those Zeppelins that were flying around here in the Bay Area, and my wife bought us it was for Father's Day, mainly for my father, but she got us a ride for two. It was called Airship Ventures. We got to fly, and that's a whole story in itself.
But they weren't Zeppelins. They were probably just dirigibles. They were just gas balloons with
it was a full-on Zeppelin because it had a frame in it.
You could get inside. You could walk inside.
Yeah, yeah, and it had a frame in it and everything.
Oh yeah, well,
and it's from Germany. This one that we were in, it was a Zeppelin. It was here in the Bay Area for a little while.
I've not been able to find any worthwhile postcards of the Zeppelins in America. And we did inherit some of the German Zeppelins in the 1920s. Maybe they turned into the Macon and the Akron. We didn't build them ourselves. We just got them from Germany.
Right. Now I have a couple little things from U.S., but so there's all my Zeppelin talk. Thank you very much. It was excellent. Thank you for the homework assignment earlier. I'm not sure how many people did their homework earlier, but that was a very good thing to get to do.
The two articles. Don, I really appreciated those cards with the Tanforan airfield because I grew up in South San Francisco.
Oh,
I was always part of the history store in San Bruno. And we heard a lot about that growing up. And then if you go to Hiller Airplane Museum, before you go into the main hall, they have a wallpapering on an enormous wall. It's about 20 feet tall of the Tanforan airfield. But you usually walk right by it. You wouldn't even know it. You know, it just looks like a big black and white wallpapering. But it's actually of that Tanforan airfield. It looks like the postcards that you had.
Unfortunately, I remember when Tanforan was used in the beginning of the war to put the Japanese people that they grabbed off the street, they put them in Tanforan. They had to stay in horse barns at the beginning. And I remember seeing those people behind the wire from that highway. It was
wow, that's amazing.
But I was so young, I didn't really know what was going on.
The history of Tanforan, like you said, is amazing how it went through different waves. And just before I got onto the Zoom, I was on YouTube about an hour and a half ago. The latest news is they're in the first phase of demolishing the mall now. Tanforan's now going through a whole nother phase, a new life now. It's going to be a whole development of apartments, condos, retail. So it's going through a whole nother wave now. And
or change.
So the history will be abolished.
Patrick.
So just to comment on the Tanforan, well, no, the horse barns and the center, internment center. So the horse barns and those internment buildings, those were moved and they still exist. They're at a place over in Palo Alto it's called the Webb Ranch. They're still used to house horses. If you look in some of them, you can see carvings in the wall that were carved in its time during the 40s.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. I have to look at that.
Thank you. So do we have time for one more question from Dawn? Looks like her.
Oh, yes, Dawn.
I want to, now I don't know how to do it. I'm going to try, but as I said, I mostly collect African Americans. So I would like to input my information that I have on the first Black African American pilot in America. Her name was, can you guys see? Her name was Bessie Coleman. She wasn't allowed to get her license in America, so she had to go to France, and she died. This is one of her The plane, it says the name of the plane on the back. You guys are probably more familiar. It's a Curtiss JN4.
Very cool. Oh, that's great with her on the plane. That's
Dawn,
Yes.
I really appreciate how you bring this up, Dawn. Just the other day, I taught all the seventh graders and eighth graders in my classes about the story of Bessie Coleman for Black History Month and for Women's History Month. It was an intersection. We went through and watched a great 4-minute video on that and how in America she wasn't able to receive her pilot's license because they
Exactly.
discriminated so much. She went to France, but before she went to France, she taught herself French here in America for a couple of years, and or not taught herself, but she took classes. Then she went to France, got her
Yeah.
pilot's license, and then came back and did barnstorming. It was an amazing story to share with everyone, and the kids really, really took to that. And then in the video, it showed her whole life deal, and then at a very young age, it showed the crash when she crashed right before an
She
airship.
crashed barnstorming. The
Yeah.
USPS honored her with the stamp. I have the 100 sheets. No, I think it was the smaller one later. So I have her stamp. The USPS did honor her with the stamp.
Yeah.
So if you guys don't mind, probably when you talk, I'll probably input my little African American part because like I
Yes.
said, I
Dawn,
collect them. Yes.
Dawn, I have a black neighbor, and I had a bunch of these American black postcards. And I didn't
Wow.
really want to keep them in my collection because they're, not very pleasant. But she was delighted to have them, so I
I
gave them to her
bet.
for her collection. Yes, indeed. I had a good bunch of them.
I met you TOO late.
Yeah.
In one of your postcards, there was a black lady in the background. I think with the shot.
Oh,
with
I
the
didn't
10.
see that.
I think there was. I'm pretty
the-
sure.
The Swiss Air program
Yeah.
showing the stewardesses in the back. Very likely, yes.
There was.
She
That was
broke the
interesting.
barrier, that first lady they took.
Wow.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I
Yes.
learned a lot. Like I said, I'm going to say it again. I was amazed that you start collecting at 7 years old.
He's
Yeah.
94 now.
Not that unusually. I started, I was 15.
Wow.
So I wonder if you're the youngest, if you're the one that collected the youngest in our group.
Anyway, I gave away half my collection to people that are in this program.
And I want to
All right.
add to Don Price, I have an idea for you. That is, contact the World War II Museum in New Orleans if you want to get more postcards of that era. I have never been there. I've heard good things about it.
It's an amazing museum.
I'm donating my dad, after having his two deferments, decided having sailors all make fun of him when he was downtown, he decided to join the Navy, and he became a photo mate. So I have all these negatives of, he was in the Pacific Fleet, of the Pacific, that I'm donating to the National World War II Museum.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank
But
you, Roseanne.
I bet they have postcards.
Well, thank you, everyone. Anything else? Anyone like to say anything? Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you. Yes, Robert.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say I'm a guest here tonight from Joe invited to the club. I really enjoyed I am unmuted. I really enjoyed the meeting. Very interesting. Can I have a screen share just for a second, Joe? Is that possible?
Yes. Yes, you should be able to. Of Zeppelin covers pieces. So he's
Can you
very
guys see that now?
Yeah.
I'm a collector of a mail that actually flew on the Graf Zeppelin in the 1930s that were franked these special stamps. They're only issued for a couple of weeks. And they're very high value. It's very expensive to mail things on the Graf Zeppelin, 65 cents, $1.30, and $2.60. So this is one of the items in my collection, which shows the complete set of those stamps. So you ever run across a postcard that flew on the Graf Zeppelin, franked with one of these stamps? Let me know, because I'm always in the market for them. Although probably not too often. But
It's an amazing cover postcard.
it's unusual to see all three of them because this is very expensive postage. It's about $90 worth of postage in today's money. That was strictly as a souvenir. But this is during the Depression. And that was obviously a great deal of money back then, $4.55. I had fun collecting this stuff.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh, sure.
Then on the stamp, the map shows the routing of that particular piece, right?
It does, yes. The $1.30 shows the route across the Atlantic rather. And then the
That's
260
fascinating.
shows the Zeppelin flying across the globe. It's very romantic kind of imagery. But these stamps are only on sale for a few weeks, for just about 6 weeks, and then they were pulled. So they're kind of scarce now.
Well, thank you, Robert.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Yes, you're welcome. I knew you would really enjoy this. That reminded me, Don, you had one of the cards that showed the map of also a Zeppelin route. You said that it made us, you said that it made a stop in Senegal, but I
That's
didn't.
where I don't know if they stopped there, but they did launch from there over
Ah,
to across the Atlantic.
but they
I
don't
probably
show
did
that
not stop there. They probably didn't land there.
because I was saying because they didn't show it on the African map.
No, I think they probably landed in Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires,
Mm,
before they came up to Lakehurst.
that's interesting.
A long trip.
It was a wonderful way to ride. It was very smooth riding through storms or whatever. It was a very comfortable way to travel in those days. It took time, but it was very comfortable in those. They were very successful, those commercial flights, until the Hindenburg blew up. That was
Mhm.
the end of that. Too bad.
Well, all right, everyone. I want to thank
All right.
everyone. It's been a great, great presentation, great gathering. It went very well. Thank you again, Celia and Don. Very nice to meet Don's family. Thank you, everyone, for inputting. Very nice, Don, like the sunrise. Nice meeting you as a new member of the club. Thank all the guests. Robert, thank you very much. That was very nice.